about a digitized economy, we need to talk about where we stand and what's going on. The empirical evidence shows or indicates that there is a close link between disparities in the diffusion of information and communication technologies, ICTs, MIL, and economic development. And this is exactly what we see in the African context. Okay. So the expectation is if we increase or an increase in digitization and the use of ICTs leads in turn to a rise in labor productivity, employment creation, and overall global economic growth, especially, as I said, for a continent like ours, where we're seeing a huge expansion in our population, especially when it comes to younger people. So the internet and devices such as the mobile phone, which is very important for us, especially in Africa. This is how most everybody does access the internet is through their mobile phones. This enables billions of people worldwide to access the crucial information that and services needed not only to meet their daily needs, but to be part of this knowledge society that we're talking about. Okay. So when we look at the global state of the digital divide, if we can change, I'm not able to change. If you can change for me, please. Thank you. Just to explain it quickly, as we all know, it's a sociological phenomenon, this digital divide, that really has implications that are broader on a social, economic, and educational level. It leads to inequalities within the domestic realm as well as globally. So as I've been saying from the start of this presentation, the new global economy is one in which capital production, the management, labor markets, technology, information are all organized across national and transnational boundaries. So what happens in one place has a ripple effect or a domino effect on other places. It's based on this new global economy is based on what we call digital dividends, and that is, if you have the knowledge, it pays you back. It raises from the living standards, the socioeconomic standing of your population and so forth. Now, the experts and the research argues that countries around the world need to strengthen the analog foundation of the digital revolution. The analog foundation is not the infrastructure, it is the human capital. In our case in Africa, it is the men and the women, and with more emphasis or more focus on the women because they're the ones who are being left behind. Okay, so in Africa, this digital revolution, and we're gonna talk, it's not all doom and gloom. It has contributed to the global growth, especially in an African sense. It has increased from people's living standards. It has improved efficiency and labor productivity. And this really stems out of the fact that we're using the internet more, that you have to have these competencies. And in Africa, we're using it through our mobile phones, through mobile broadband in particular. So the ITU in 2019 report indicated that while more than half of the world's population is now online, okay, which is a good thing, most of the people who are offline tend to be in rural areas around the globe, and 70% of those who are offline are women, half of them in sub-Saharan Africa. So we really do have an issue here when it comes to the skills, the accessibility, and the competencies, with this new knowledge society. So this leads us to this phenomena that, is really intertwined with the gender aspect. And if you could change for me, please.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is what we call the digital underclass. These are people who are excluded from digitization, from the knowledge society, and they're non-users of the internet. And this has manifested mostly in Africa and parts of Southeast Asia. especially for females. So the four indicators that consistently show up as strong predictors when we do this kind of research in Africa: digital exclusion, of lack of MIL competencies and skills, is the age, the education level, the disability. But gender seems to be, these are all subsets in which gender is, if you want to envision, a Venn diagram, it's the big circle is gender, and then all of these age, education, disability are within. We're not saying that males are not affected, but we're saying that females in Africa are more likely to be part of this digital underclass than the male. Okay. So now this brings us to, we were making leaps and bounds or strides, and it was getting better. But the COVID-19 pandemic actually kind of stifled growth, when it comes to globally and especially within an African context. So the internet and mobile devices, as we said before, connect people, give them access to crucial information, make them part of the digital economy, help them meet their daily needs. But with the disruptions that we've seen from the COVID-19 pandemic, as we know it, the access, life as we know it has been disrupted. Access to the internet and mobile devices and having the skills have become even more important than ever. And there's no denying that, even though we hope, or we're seeing now that this pandemic is kind of waning away, but some things are here to stay. Otherwise, we would not be meeting on Zoom today. Probably we would have been meeting face to face. So people who don't have these skills or don't have this access are going to be left behind. During the 2020 stringent global lockdowns that we saw, access to the internet and mobile phones provided a way for people to stay connected. So just imagine that, if you're female somewhere in rural Africa and, your life, you're just told to stay inside, you don't really have access to a mobile phone with internet. You cannot continue your education or your kids' education in any way. And you cannot continue to work to earn an income. And these mobile phones have really become the bane of the existence for a lot of small businesses run by women in an African context. So again, the research shows everything is intertwined. You have access to a mobile phone, you know how to use it, you have access to the internet, if we can go back, okay? And we do know that women across the world do carry a heavier burden when it comes to their families. In an African context, it's not any different. But the research and the indices point to the fact that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on females in Africa. They've had more household responsibility. In other words, the children's education, you have to find ways. And their incomes suffered the most, more than the males. And job loss was more amongst the female demographic than it was amongst the males. So you have now, a compounded issue. You have lack of skills, you have lack of accessibility, and then you have a pandemic that is really disrupting a way of life that, people had before, and they need to find new ways to be able to, provide for themselves. So let's talk about, the global state of women, and then connect that to where we are here in Africa when it comes to, the skills and the competencies. Before the pandemic, and even during the pandemic, women's access to mobile internet, which is, this is your gateway to the knowledge society, continues or has continued to increase, especially across low and middle income countries, and African countries are within that realm. While mobile ownership remains relatively flat in the last 2 years, from like 2019 to 2021, 83% of women now own a mobile phone, and 58% in an African context actually use the mobile internet. So there is improvement. Women are more likely than men to access the internet exclusively on a mobile handset, which again highlights the importance of both increasing mobile access for women, as well as reducing this mobile gender gap, which in turn might lead to a reduction in, the issues of media information literacy. But we still have to put in mind that we have to work with this issue of literacy before we even address the media and information literacy, part of it. So the gender gap in mobile internet use continues to reduce, again, with women in low and middle income countries, 15% less likely to use it than the men. So we still have that disparity, not only in the skills, but also in the accessibility. So while the overall gender gap in mobile ownership remains largely unchanged since 2017, the gender gap in the smartphone ownership has reduced for the first time in 2020, but not in Africa. We see this in South Asia. The wide gaps have consistently kind of narrowed, but we still have a big issue here on the continent. So just to run you quickly through the numbers, African women are now 15% likely to own a smartphone than men. That's down from 20% in 2019. So that's a 5% decrease. It's not that big, but at least there is steady change. As we said, COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns have increased the need for connectivity, the need for digital and MIL competencies. But again, those go hand in hand with a need to educate and to have a literate group of women. In some countries, there are signs that this pandemic may have disproportionately negatively impacted women's handset ownership and this applies to the African continent in an African context. So there is a persistent gender gap when it comes to accessibility. And as I said, we're talking about mobile phones in particular, because that's how we access, or most people on the continent actually access the internet. This is how they have access to the internet. We are seeing that on par with male owners in terms of mobile internet adoption and the range of mobile services that they use. Females it's kind of leveling off, but we still do have issues, big issues that need to be addressed. So when we talk about the mobile phone and accessibility and MIL in sub-Saharan Africa, the new or empirical research indicates that the gender gap, in mobile internet continues to reduce. And with the usage rates that are increasing for both the men and the women. However, what we're seeing is that the female mobile users on the internet, they feel less able and less confident than their male counterparts to learn a new activity on the phone by themselves. However, once they're guided to do the task, if somebody shows them, their confidence is restored and they're able to do it again by themselves on par with the male users. So that again takes us to the fact that we have an issue of not giving women a chance, that the skill training part is missing, that the literacy part is missing, that more effort needs to be focused on the women than it is on the men. Okay, so the challenges that we see, that there needs to be a more concerted and unified approach to address the gaps on the continent for a fair distribution of these digital dividends. And I'm going to explain why they're so important for us. This global economy is contingent on a workforce. And as I said, we're moving towards a knowledge society. If we want to be a part of it, you have to have a workforce that has access to the digital economy, knows the skills, has the MIL skills that are needed to navigate this ecosystem. In turn, our countries across the continent need to invest in people, and which is the human capital or the analog foundation, especially women if you don't want to have that digital underclass. Now, as we said earlier, yes, there is a disparity between countries. I gave examples of Botswana and Chad, but across the board, we're still at 66% when it comes to literacy rates. So by default, your media and information literacy is also going to suffer. So the policy recommendations that we need to be looking at is an increased focus and support for media and information literacy programs, as well as a push to close this gap for literacy levels for women. A focus on the gender equality and access to the internet. This becomes an ethical obligation. I mean, if you want to have women really partake in the global economy. The creating and strengthening existing, regional, local organizations. It's growing. Mill cities, the concepts are growing throughout the continent, but we need to have partnerships, more partnerships. We need to work together. We need to learn from each other's experiences in different parts of the continent with existing global entities in literacy and MIL programs. Now, something that when we say women, it is important. There are 1.4 billion Africans currently. 700 million are males. It's a 50-50. 700 million are females. So if you are not addressing these gaps, that means that you are ignoring half your population. So I don't like to, as I said, it looks like as if it's all doom and gloom, but on a final note or on final notes, I'd like to, conclude with positive things, so that we can look forward. Our predicted average GDP is going to be 6.7 between 2021 to 2025. And that's huge for the entire continent, okay? We have the fastest tech startup ecosystem in Africa. Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, they're ranked in the top 20 global crypto adoption indices. Africa is regarded as the world's second fastest growing and profitable payments and banking market after Latin America, okay? Namibia, Cape Verde, Ghana, South Africa, Burkina Faso, Botswana, they have higher press freedom indices than the USA. But this is not really going to take us forward, or we're really not going to reap the benefits of this unless we invest in human capital, especially women, to ensure that they're part of this renaissance that we're seeing. And we have to play catch up. Why do I say that we have to play catch up? Well, when I started the presentation, we have a 66% adult literacy rate on the continent. So there really is an issue. So we're doing two things here. It's twofold for us. We need to catch up with the literacy rate, and then at the same time, we need to be addressing the issue of skills, of MIL, of digital inclusion, and of the gender gap that we are seeing across the continent. So that was that, and thank you very much.
Wow, thank